Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first of our four-part webinar series, exploring the link between artificial intelligence, rehabilitation, and the law. Now, today we're going to look at artificial intelligence in the context of amputation cases. The second of our four-part webinar will be in April on the link between brain injury and artificial intelligence. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that at the conclusion of today's event. So thank you to you all for joining us today. Promises to be a really fascinating event, and we've got some great speakers. So by way of introductions, I'm Richard Biggs. I'm a partner in the serious injury team at Irwin Mitchell. Our first speaker will be Graham Thompson, who's our Chief Information Officer here at IIM. Then we're joined by Alan McDougall and Katie McIntosh, who are prosthetists at Proactive Prosthetics. And I'm grateful to Alan and to Katie for joining us. They've had a really busy few months. They opened a new clinic in Leeds at the end of last year. And just on Monday, they announced that on the 19th of February, they'll be opening a third clinic in Bristol. So thanks to Alan and Katie for taking the time out to join us today. So agenda for today. So I'm going to pass over to Graham shortly, who's going to talk for 15 minutes to give an overview on artificial intelligence and the law and explain what generative AI is and why AI is going to be so important to us moving forwards. We'll then have Katie and Alan will talk for about 45 minutes, and then we've got time for questions afterwards. Now please submit questions using the Q&A function as we go along. We'll answer the questions at the end of today's session. Can I just ask, please, when submitting the questions, can you leave your name and email address? So if we don't get to your questions, then we'll respond directly to you following the event. We'll also be recording this webinar so we can send out a link afterwards. And towards the end of the session, we'll be posting a link in the Q&A session asking for your feedback. So if you do have a few minutes, we'd be really grateful if you could give us some feedback. We'd love to hear what you think. So why are we here today? Well, we've called our webinar series Exploring the Future, but I think we could just as easily have called the series Exploring the Present, because AI is already among us. It's here to stay. It's going to become even more prominent, as I'm sure we'll hear over the coming hour and a quarter. You may have seen yesterday, just in the news, Elon Musk has announced that his company Neuralink have successfully implanted a wireless brain chip into a human, and that's aimed at connecting the human brain to a computer. And the aim of that is to tackle complex neurological conditions. So we'll see how that develops. You may have seen at the start of January that Microsoft announced that they're going to have on the new Windows keyboards an AI button which links directly to ChatGPT. So it's going to be part of our everyday lives as well when we log on. As a lawyer, I find AI absolutely fascinating, and I really have given a lot of thought to how will it transform the way we work over the coming years. For example, who's at fault if AI goes wrong? Can I, as a lawyer, bill my clients for hours of work that AI could generate within seconds? And will clients use a ChatGPT to solve legal issues in the same way that people now Google symptoms or medical symptoms to self-diagnose? My own view is that, and I hope it's shared actually with all of you listening today, but I hope that the emotional intelligence that we need to do our jobs well will never be replaced by artificial intelligence, but it remains to be seen. I think what is certain is that change is coming, and we all need to be ready for that change. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Graham to tell us a little bit more about the link between AI and the law. So thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks Richard. Yeah, so it's a fascinating subject. So my name's Graham Thompson. I'm a partner and the Chief Information Security Officer for the group, so primarily looking after cyber security. I previously led our data analytics team as well, and I currently also lead on tech innovation, which includes generative AI, which has really gone hit the roof in the last year. So there was a quote from a professor in economist just a couple of years ago saying, AI won't take your job, but somebody using AI will. And I'm kind of explore the kind of why about that and how it can help you. So let's start with a little riddle. I'm lost, I'm spent, I'm saved, and I'm wasted, but I'm not a physical thing. What am I? Well, it's a rhetorical question on this call. It's time. And one of the things that generative AI in particular can help with is time. So I'm just going to give a very quick demo of what I'm talking about. So this is one of the tools. This is Microsoft Copilot for Bing. The model behind it is what OpenAI use as ChatGPT. And if you haven't seen them, you put in your prompts, and I've got a text already done that I can just copy. So list 3 things that happened in the prosthetics sector in the last month, provide associated facts and figures. Press go. Now this model, this system does have internet access, so it's a bit like Bing search, a bit like Googling stuff, but what it's doing is it's going off, finding the information, and then it's presenting it in the way that I've asked for, rather than just doing, say, a normal internet search where you just get a whole list of pages. Now, what it also does is it references where it finds the information with links. So as I'll talk about a little later on, it's great. These tools are great at producing text and manipulating text, but they aren't always right. You've got to verify the information, and the human is ultimately the final sort of Q&A of any of this. But this just shows the power of what it can do. So it's found 3 things. It's provided some links. Now, what I'm going to do now is I want the tool to turn it into an article for a magazine style kind of thing. You know, it might be for a newsletter. I'm saying I want the text to be interesting, highly readable, mildly amusing. I could say sad, I could say very funny, I could even set what style I want it in, and flows well for the reader. And then I'm going to specify the format as well, which is Markdown, which is like Word documents, headers, that type of thing. I could say as for an Excel spreadsheet, or I could even get it to write code. So I'm just going to press go. And it's going to get straight off and do that. Now, I'm not going to read through all of this, but that's the power of this, in that it can save time. So if you're trying to do something that's text-based, as long as your command of language is good, and I'll talk about prompt engineering in a second, you can pretty much get it to manipulate text in any way you want. So let's go back to the presentation. So what is artificial intelligence? Well, there isn't really a great definition of it. There's a few of the legislation out there that does give a go at defining it, but ultimately it's maths, it's algorithms that it started, you know, it's nothing new. It started in the 50s. It's based on the way biological learning works, but ultimately it's still just an equation. So it wasn't really until the power of computing made big data crunching feasible with these algorithms, and that they call machine learning. So you can take massive amount of data, run these artificial networks, artificial neural networks across it, to do analysis. That's really what it was about. Then in the 2010s, deep learning became a thing. Deep learning is just AI, machine learning, but there's lots of, it's a very complex neural network. And what that does is it can be used in tasks like image recognition, language processing, speech synthesis, a lot of some really clever stuff, but requires huge amounts of computing power to do it. Now that all works one way, where you take a lot of data and it filters through for an answer. The computer engineers realized a few years ago that actually it can work the other way. It can go the opposite direction. You can take a neural network and you can start with the output, put some information in, and then it comes with a much bigger output, which is basically creating stuff, generating stuff, and that's generative AI. So we've now got tools that can generate image, text, sound, and video. from a small input, and it can create a large output. The famous one, ChatGPT, that went live in just November in 2022, and they had been around for a few years before that, but weren't that great. But ChatGPT really showed the power of it. The version now of ChatGPT, which is known as GPT version 4, is hugely powerful, and they are just getting more and more powerful. And I'll show you some of that power now. So I won't just give you a lecture on this, but traditional non-generative AI, really the benefits in business is on analytics and better prediction. It's used in recommendation engines, it's used in self-driving cars and data analytics, it's that sort of thing. And something like Neuralink would use traditional AI, machine learning, to get the algorithms to work out, well, the signals from your brain, what do they actually mean? And what happens in the actual algorithms isn't necessarily known or explainable. It's just the result that's explainable, which for some purposes can be quite dangerous, but we'll let the data scientists worry about all of that. Generative AI, on the other hand, creates new content, and it comes pre-trained with huge amounts of data, and it understands what the links between words or the links between bits of an image or sound, all of that. And examples are ChatGPT, DALL-E for images, and Microsoft's Copilots, which use the OpenAI model. So what we currently use in our firm, we use traditional AI in things like language translation. So we have a secure and private tool where you can convert from one language to another. I use it in cybersecurity all the time. We automate a huge amount of very technical tasks in cybersecurity with the products that we use, and that saves us a load of time, improves security. And in data science as well. So we analyze large data sets for insights, things like income forecasting, classification of the client's material that we have, marketing data analysis, all of that's fairly traditional. But generative AI is really a game changer. It wasn't, it's not a fad, it's not going to go away because it's so useful. And Gartner, a big technology research company, have done a whole load of research and a whole load of predictions, whether they're right or not. But basically, they reckon that most companies will be using it. It'll be embedded into a lot of processes over the next few years. Interestingly, they also think that there'll be a neutral impact on jobs, because for all the jobs that now become automated, there'll actually be, in fact, more new jobs created as a result. And that is the trend we've seen with previous AI automation. And a great example is in cybersecurity. There's still more jobs than there are people, even though we automate a lot of stuff with AI. So what can it actually do? Well, this can be cut in lots of different ways, but I put it into 5 key categories. You've got a general chatbot, so you can create a Q&A bot on any subject. So you can actually chat with your documents, and it can automate stuff as well. Summarization of long text, that's a real sweet spot for it. So take huge amounts of like a 100-page PDF, and you can summarize it in seconds. You can also extract themes from it. What's the sentiment? Explain the key numbers within it. Content creation and modification, that's a real sweet spot as well. So whether it's creating an email, a document, a speech, all of that, plus images for your presentations. Data and text analysis, so it doesn't replace traditional machine learning for really big data analysis, but for small data analysis, things like a spreadsheet, a table, or even an unstructured document, it's pretty good at that. And it can extract insights and do categorization, sentiment analysis, that type of thing. And then the last one, you've got code generation and analysis. So they've proven to be very good at fixing all sorts of different software codes, creating it from scratch, and that includes Excel formulas and the like. And my experience of it is it might give you, sometimes it'll give you 100% of the answer and it'll be correct, but mostly it needs a bit of tweaking. So it's not going to replace those roles, but it's definitely an aid to help people in those roles. The benefits are real, they really are real. There's lots of reports of companies that have put this in place where people are saving, a couple hours a day by using these tools. But you can use them in the way that I saw, which is, one-on-one and very manual. That saves time, but actually you can use the models behind it to automate big tasks like reading thousands of documents very, very quickly. And that saves hours and hours of time for companies that are doing it. Lots of companies are using it to write product descriptions, and customer emails, because I'm pretty sure everyone can write an email, but how do you write an email that's easy to understand by a neurodiverse person? Well, these tools can convert what you've got into that very, very quickly. Professional services companies like KPMG, PwC, they've invested significantly into this, and they've been quite public about what they're doing. And ultimately, with our own user group, we've had hundreds of people across the business as part of the pilot to learn and to look at use cases. And we're saving lots of time on particularly BAU manual tasks like writing meeting minutes, analysing documents, summarising large documents, that sort of thing. So there is a bit of hype around it, although it seems to have died down in recent months, but a few months ago it was sort of the world is falling apart level. What's so unique about AI is what's feared. It has an ability to match human skills, but actually to go further and accomplish what some people can. So not everyone's a great copywriter or a creative writer. Not everyone's a great artist. This tool elevates skills that you don't have. And if you do have the skills, it's probably not going to help you in those areas. But none of us are great at everything. This can help in lots of different ways. Copyright fears, well, I'll talk a little, very briefly later. It's not a database. These are statistical models. It doesn't regurgitate. It doesn't copy and regurgitate. It's a statistical model like predictive text. And probably not surprisingly, based on that, Microsoft, Google, and Adobe, and probably others I'm not aware of now, protect commercial customers from copyright infringement claims when using the tools. Now, I know there are copyright legal cases going through, particularly in America, that seem largely about, did those companies have permission to use the training data they did, which is a slightly different thing. Detecting AI text, there's lots of tools out there that say they can detect text written by AI, but it's actually been proven mathematically by someone at a university in America that it just can't be done. You can obviously detect plagiarism. There's tools to do that, where they scan the internet and find if sentences have been mentioned elsewhere. You can't detect something written by AI. There are styles where you can recognize a bit of a style from a particular tool, but if you write your prompt in a particular way, you'll get a different output. So it comes, this model that we use anyway, ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, it's been trained with what's the equivalent of 500 million books worth. It's massive. And to do that takes a lot of processing power and even a lot of electricity, and it's reported that ChatGPT costs something like $4 million in electricity just to train. That's just the electricity. So people just, you can't make these things yourself, and that's why the big players, Google, Amazon, Apple, all the rest of them, they're investing huge amounts of money in this. It is in essence a huge predictive text machine or predictive image machine. It's not a database. So the difference between public and private. So when it first came out, the reason I got into this for our companies with my security hat on, I didn't want colleagues posting sensitive information through these tools, and then that information being used or captured by the third parties that ran these tools. We want something internal, secure and private. So anyone can use the public ones, but secure and private ones, you have to sign up and pay for the services from these major players. But almost all, a load of software vendors are beginning to integrate generative AI tools into the software because it's so useful and it makes things a lot more intuitive for the users. So what we've got is we've got the Bing Copilot that I showed you the website of. Just until a few weeks ago, that was called Bing Chat Enterprise, confusingly, but they're calling all their tools Copilot now. Plus, we've got some bespoke tools using the Microsoft Power Platform. So we're making a Power App, which is just an application for colleagues where you won't need to worry about writing a prompt. We'll have a whole load of preset prompts to do certain tasks. We might end up with hundreds of them, but that just makes it really quick and easy for colleagues. These tools, they're hosted in our Microsoft data centers. All the data is processed there. It's 100% private to us. All the chat data is encrypted. They're not used or accessed by Microsoft or anyone else to train the models. It's all completely private. So this is what it looks like when you log in with your company account. It tells you you're protected and that's your company logo. And here's an example of getting it to do an image. And just like I showed you at the start, you put your information, you put your prompt in, you press go, and then you can continue the chat as well. Now this is this here is called Bing Copilot Sidebar, and this is the same thing. It's the same model and it works in exactly the same way. But what it allows you to do is it can read what you're viewing in the browser in Edge. So if you've got a PDF open, and this example is a 100-page PDF, you can write a prompt that says, summarize it, or summarize it in a particular way. And it'll do it very, very quickly. And what it also does is it leaves links to what it finds to where it found it in the document. So you can click on the link, it'll go to the position in the document so you can verify that information. So prompt engineering is definitely a thing. This is the skill that I think people, particularly in office type roles, is worth learning about very early on. And give it a few years, there'll be, this will just be like being able to use email or Word. It'll be so fundamental. So a prompt is a command. But instead of it being a kind of software type command that looks a bit like gobbledygook, the way I always think about this is if you had a genius assistant, a human assistant who could just do anything, they were absolute genius, polymath, but they didn't have any common sense, couldn't really think for themselves, but they'll do exactly what you ask them to do. So as long as you're clear in what you ask them to do, they'll be able to do it. And that's the same with prompting. You've got to be clear, you've got to be specific, and it helps when you tell it what its role is. Is it a copywriter? Is it an HR professional? Is it a lawyer? Is it a cybersecurity professional? And what task is it going to do? Is it going to analyze? Is it going to create? And so on. You can tell it what style it is. Otherwise, it'll just give you a generic style. So you can say you want it to be your company tone of voice. You can also specify the output, and the output can be just normal text. It can be in a table. It can be in a JSON, in a CSV, even as codes. And then there's a couple of things that research shows that it works better if you do this. Now that's debatable, but you can see how it works for you. So if you start with take a deep breath and work step by step, and if you end with provide factual answers based on evidence and be authentically human. So we have an example there. It's really something you build up knowledge with as you use these tools, but they definitely makes a difference if you're good at prompting. So finally, limitations, they do have limitations, and you need to know them to be able to use the tools safely and effectively. So it has huge scope to help with database, day-to-day text-based tasks. But depending on how you're using it, don't rely on it being 100% right. So it can do these thing called hallucinations, which is making stuff up because it's predictive text. Now you can minimize that by making sure your prompt is right, and understanding the tool that you have. You know, some of the tools, they don't have internet access. So if you ask what happened last week in a particular subject, it'll give you an answer, but it won't be correct. And if it has got internet access, then you've got to make sure that it gives you references, which you can check. It does have potential for bias, although arguably it can help you remove human biases depending on what you're doing. And ultimately, the quality of your prompting really matters. So the thing to always keep in mind is the human's the expert. You've got to review and verify the output. And also, depending on what type of business you work in, if it's regulated, if you're dealing with sensitive data and ethical issues, you want to make sure that your use cases, which are effectively based on prompts, they are ethical, they're compliant with your processes, and that you can pay attention to data protection laws. So the tool, it doesn't allow you to skip any thresholds that you would expect of humans. You've got to be the ultimate Q&A and risk assessor of what you're doing. So that's it. Thank you for listening. I'd like to hand over to Alan and Katie.
Hi there, everyone. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Graham. That was really informative. I definitely learned quite a lot from that presentation there. I think I'd just like to start just quickly, just at a bit of a caveat. We've been asked to do this presentation, AI, in prosthetics. As a clinician, I like to think myself as an expert in prosthetics. I certainly am not an expert in AI. So just want to put that out there. However, been asked to do this talk, been doing quite a lot of research in it, been looking at what experiences I've had. I've talked to other people within my industry and within different parts of the industry of how AI is being used. And it's probably quite different from what we've just heard there. I think Graham's just spoke about the really interesting generative AI, with as far as text and pictures and stuff like that, which I think we can all use in day-to-day life. How that's applied to prosthetics is probably a little bit different. So if we just go on to the next slide. So yeah, little quick introduction. So yeah, it's myself. I'm the clinical director at Proactive. Just for those of you who don't know, Proactive, we're a prosthetics and orthotic provider within the UK. We will have 3 clinics up and down the UK. We've got our current one in Godalming, which has actually been established for over 20 years now. But we have had some sort of organic expansion recently. So as it was previously mentioned, we've got a clinic up in Leeds, now one in Bristol. Originally for this presentation, it was going to be my colleague Katie who's going to be helping me do this. I'm going to be honest, I've been really bad and I've taken over completely, and I've not given Katie too much of a chance, so she'll chip in when needed today, maybe to try and keep me on track or correct me if I've done something wrong. So yeah, just move on to the next slide. So yeah, so the aims of today. So we want to have a little bit of an overview of AI, which we've kind of had already, but I'll probably give you my overview of AI. We've got the history of AI in prosthetics, the current use of AI in prosthetics, and then probably for me anyway, the more interesting bit, the future of AI in prosthetics. So when I was doing this presentation, I was sitting at the kitchen table doing a bit of research at it, and my 10-year-old daughter came up to me. and I was trying to look for a picture to go onto this, and she was like, "Dad, you can just use AI to generate these images," which I kind of did know, but I hadn't really used too much of. So I thought, oh, it'd be nice to do an image for like the aims of today. We could do a nice, starting image for this. So I did. I went into, I think I used Bing's image creator, and it came up with the image. It's on the next page. And I think what you can see there is it's a really nice image that it came up with, but the image generated in that probably wasn't great at the text side of stuff. So there's quite a few spelling mistakes in there. And I think for me, it was just interesting to show that, AI used in the correct way is really, really good, but used in the wrong way, it's not necessarily perfect. With this image creator, I've probably gone overboard on some of the slides. I got quite into it and I found it quite useful, and I would definitely will be using it in the future for future presentations. So yeah, if we go on to the next slide. Here's one of my images, yeah. Anyway, so again, as Graham mentioned, what is artificial intelligence? And it's difficult to get a definitive sort of description of it. I quite like this, the machines emulating human-like functions, and I think that really describes maybe what we try to do in prosthetics as well, machines emulating human-like functions. We're fitting people with legs, we're wanting to get them walking as good as possible, but when we're actually really thinking about it, I think some of the mechanical stuff in prosthetics is the easier part of it. But when we actually talk about wanting to move a leg or wanting to move an arm and how that arm's moved, then we're really talking about the human brain. We're not talking about the mechanics of it. And the human brain's the most complicated, structure known. We're talking 80 billion neurons, trillions of different connections. So when we want to actually sort of try and replicate how that brain is controlling an artificial leg, then this becomes, I would say, really complex. So the sort of AI role in prosthetics is way more complex than what essentially or eventually will be way more complex than what we just heard about from Graham. So yeah, if we go into the next slide, again in my research of AI, I started going through the different classifications of AI, and Graham touched on this as well. I found multiple different classifications of it, and lots of people classifying it in different types of ways. So these classifications, I've got 4 of them going through. For me, splits it into something, hopefully tries to break it down into something quite simplistic, and it makes it a little bit relevant for prosthetics as well for this. So the first classification that we've got here is reactive. And this is, I would say, a very basic form of an artificial intelligence. So this is where we have a model that uses previously gained experiences to make some automated responses and outputs. So if we put this into a prosthetic knee, for instance, this will be, we have inputs from different signals and sensors going into it, the processor they're doing it, and then giving some automated responses, which essentially are defined algorithms that have already been produced. And this kind of just basic reactive stuff doesn't have the real-time learning. So those algorithms stay; they don't change. They're not reactive. Oh, sorry, that's not the right word, but they're not changing as it happens. So I think for me, this is what is the majority. This is what's used in the majority of what we call like smart prosthetic products out there these days. Although my question is here, is this really thought of as AI these days? The presentation from Graham just showed the power of this sort of generative type of AI, and certainly what we're using in prosthetics is not generative AI yet. I think is interesting. So if we go into the next classification, onto the next slide, I've classified this as limited memory AI, and this is probably a lot of the current AI technology that is in use in the world, not the generative stuff that we talked about with Graham, but the more, I'm looking at it from more sort of the machine learning and what's going on there. So this sort of current type of AI is what's used in face recognition. It's used in autonomous cars, chatbots. And the thing about any kind of artificial intelligence is at the moment it needs lots and lots of data input. So for instance, the face recognition, I was just looking on the news, saw the news the other day there, they're looking at bringing in face recognition in their supermarkets to tell if you're over 25 and should be challenged to buy alcohol or not, which would be great because when you do go to the self-service checkouts, that's always the bit that slows the whole process down. But I think this is able to be done relatively successfully because the amount of data that's put in there is massive. You think about it, we've all got face recognition on our phone, in all these self-service checkouts, there's a camera there. So, face recognition, the data amount, the data there is huge. The same for autonomous cars. If you take a Tesla, it's got multiple cameras around that. There is however many million of them driving the roads, and they're gaining data as they're driving down all the roads all the time. So again, that data is really important. The other thing we need to think about is whatever data is gathered from it, it needs to be really carefully annotated. So essentially the annotating of this data is a very human, sort of labour-intensive part. So if we were trying to take data on somebody walking and we were looking at the flexion of, I don't know, somebody that had quite maybe an orthotic patient that had quite an abnormal limb, then we would need to be annotating that sort of gait data to say, yeah, this is the knee joint that's bending, that is the ankle joint that's bending. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot of AI that will be able to automate some of that. But we need to make sure that this is all, lots of data annotated well. Again, my question here is, how much data is there in prosthetics? Because the reality is, it's a small niche sector within healthcare. I think we've always been in prosthetics to a certain degree, slightly behind the curve when it comes to technology. So if we look at some of the technology that we use in some of the products we've got at the moment, a lot of this technology is from different sectors. So we use like motion, IMUs, inertial motion units, to detect whether like a knee joint is moving forwards, backwards. And these motion units have been developed for lots of other industries. Mainly, we've all got them on our mobile phones. Your mobile phone knows what orientation that it's in. So yeah, I think we're lacking in data in prosthetics, and probably the annotation of this data. Who is annotating it? Because again, you can't just employ a huge office full of cheap labour somewhere in the world to annotate prosthetic data, because it's quite niche and it would take quite a lot of training for those annotators to be able to sort of accurately do that. So I think this is where artificial intelligence will catch up with prosthetics, but I think a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily there yet. So that's limited memory. So if we go on to the next slide, a third classification of artificial intelligence is kind of the theory of mind. And this is really where we're talking about, this is what's in development now. Probably some of the generative stuff is touching on this. But this is probably the next level of AI that we'll see in our lifetime. And this is where AI can now not just start to use data to make decisions, but it can start to understand the human side of things. It can start to understand emotions, beliefs, and the human thought process. So it's the understanding of it. It's not necessarily processing it, but it's actually having a true understanding of that. And I think these are the kind of things that I think from a rehab point of view could be great. This could be used in, clinical psychology. It could be used with talking through patients. If we've got a new patient here and they've got, questions about what their journey is going to be like. I think these are the kind of things that we will get to see, hopefully in our lifetime. So then if we move on to the fourth classification, which is probably the scary classification, as you can tell with my AI generated image there, that's where we're talking about self-aware artificial intelligence. It's not in practice, it's definitely a theory, but this is where we would have artificial intelligence that's akin to the human brain, and the worrying bit is perhaps more as well. So this is where we have artificial intelligence being able to think for itself and develop itself going forwards. There's not the technology. Even if we had the warrant for this and we had the algorithms, there's not the technology or the computer power to achieve that yet. And I think the reality is the technology to achieve the computer power that we need to have some kind of self-aware artificial intelligence is quite far off. But this is the kind of AI that we've seen in movies like Terminator or the Ultron and the Marvel movies. And this is where, you know, machines start to think for themselves. And is that the end of the world? I don't think it's going to be in our lifetime. Maybe, you never know. And if we move on to the next slide. So if I go into a wee bit of the history of AI in prosthetics, these smart systems, I think, again, having to caveat this is AI. It's not anything on the same the same sort of level as the generative AI that we're talking about, the image generation and the chat GBT kind of stuff. But I think this probably gives us a nice sort of overview of where prosthetics has been looking at intelligence and how it has improved the quality of life for patients. So the first sort of smart system that was available in prosthetics was back in 1993. So we're talking about over 30 years ago now, and that was the Blatchford's Intelligent Prosthesis. So this was a knee joint made by the British company Blatchford's, and this was the first sort of instrumented electronic prosthetic component that there was on the market. And what that did is it adapted the patient's swing characteristics of their knee. So if you imagine when you're walking, you put your heel down on the ground, the knee wants to be relatively stable, but when you progress forward and your knee swings, your knee needs to swing up to a certain angle and then swing back through, ready for heel contact. However, up until the advent of this type of knee, what we would do to control the heel rise there is we would have either hydraulics or pneumatics within a cylinder, and we would just adjust them to a level so that the heel rise came up to the desired angle, and then it would go forwards. However, as soon as the patient started to walk at different speeds, that heel rise wanted to change. So the prosthetic legs were great at walking at one speed, not so good at walking at multiple speeds. So yeah, this knee joint was the first one to adapt that, which is quite a world, you know, a good one, a world first. However, fast forward to 1997, and that technology was trumped by Ottobock. So this was when the advent of the first C leg came out. So those of you who've had experience with amputees probably know about the C leg. So the C leg was the first leg that came out that had sensing technology, fairly unique sensing technology and algorithms, not just to control the swing of the leg, but to control the stability of the leg as well. And I think this was quite brave from this point of view, because now we're letting, at this point in time, 1997, you're letting algorithms and a microprocessor within a knee control safety critical decisions within the knee. This would, you know, hopefully, you know, if these went wrong, it would cause a patient to fall. The reality of it was that when the C-leg came along, it made walking stability of above knee amputees a lot higher. So, for instance, what it does is it always keeps the knee in a level of high level of stability, i.e. the knee doesn't really want to bend, or it does bend, but with some resistance. And then it will use the sensing technology and the algorithms that are in it to make sure that the knee goes into swing phase, which is like low resistance at the most sort of safety critical point in time. So in the C leg, it was used for it was a toe load sensor essentially. So when the patient put 70% of their weight on the toe of the knee was in full extension. That criteria would be met, and then the knee would release into swing phase. And the success of the C leg, it was massive, and I think we can still see probably the basics of that technology in a lot of the knee joints that we use today. So if we just move on to the next slide. So fast forward a little bit more, with the success of that knee and other companies in prosthetics, you know, wanting to be there, there's been an advent of a lot more other knees there. So we had the Blatchford adaptive knee, we have had the Osser Rio knee, the Blatchford came out with their Rye knee, which is a sort of newer version of their adaptive. And then in 2011, Ottobock came out with the Genium, and then following on from that, the Genium X3. And these are products that, you know, we use regularly within prosthetics, and, you know, there'll be people who have seen them, whether it be clients of yourselves or whether it'll be medical legal reports. But, you know, as far as a clinician, what's commercially available today, that's the sort of pinnacle of technology. If you look at it, it came out in 2011, so it's not necessarily new technology. So I think we've slowed down a little bit in prosthetics, with hopefully a little bit of a surge in new technology coming soon. So moving forward from these, the next development that came out also in 2011 was the Ossert Symbionic leg. So this was the first, that's the picture on the right there, that's the first leg that had a microprocessor controlled knee and a microprocessor controlled foot in communication with each other, are linked. So it was the first integrated knee and foot. I'm going to be honest, that product doesn't actually exist anymore. It's been discontinued. And I think the reality, like what the link between it was, probably rather than actually doing anything that clever, it was a link between with batteries than anything else. However, in 2015, Blatchford came out with the Blatchford Links, which is a knee and a foot that communicate with each other. And there's quite a lot of intelligence that's going on there. So they're using sensors within the foot to control what was going on in the knee. And essentially, you know, when you think about how the human leg works, we are getting lots and lots of sensory feedback going to our brain. Our brain's making the decision to what would happen. So if I took it to an extreme example, you know, if you were walking along and you stood in a nail, you're getting that feedback from your foot. And at that point in time, you're going to bend your hip and you're going to bend your knee to move your foot out of the way. So I think these limb systems where feet and knees are connected to each other are clearly the way sort of technology will be evolving in the future. The next big development in prosthetics is another product we use regularly, which was the Biome foot, which is now called the Empower. So again, initially launched in 2011, so we're still talking 13 years ago. It was rebranded and repackaged and changed ever so slightly in 2017, but essentially it's still the same, you know, the same model that we're using today in prosthetics. Again, all these things are using the basic reactive AI that we talked about, algorithms sitting in there, and, you know, and then having the input and just making a relatively simple output. So if we go on to the next slide, we've got upper limb prosthetics as well. I thought I would just touch on this for completeness, almost. I don't want to miss it out. It's a smaller part of prosthetics. It doesn't make up the biggest numbers of our patients, but it is still really important, and it's quite interesting as well. So if we look at the technology that goes into this, we're talking myoelectric upper limb prosthesis. First came about in 1948 and then became available in the 1960s commercially. And some of the stuff that was available in the 1960s in some kind of form are still widely used and available today. Again, from an AI perspective, it is very, very, very basic stuff. It's a very basic reactive bit, but we're talking, there's inputs coming in from the patient, which is from these two electrodes that are attached in the socket. These are reading EMG signals from the muscles. And when those EMG signals meet a certain threshold and meet certain parameters, then the system will then tell the hand to open at a certain speed or with a certain force. And likewise, the sensor that's on the other side of the arm, once that is met a certain threshold, it'll tell the hand to close. So that kind of technology has been around, and we still use it today. It's very commonly used within prosthetics. What's been quite interesting recently in prosthetics is the development of the robotics. So it's not necessarily the control systems, but the robotics over the last sort of, I would say, sort of 15 years came on quite a lot. So the first multi-articulating hand that came on the market was in 2007, and there's been lots of other ones that have followed that, with the B-Bionic, Michelangelo, Tasca, Colvin, tons and tons more. So we go on to the next slide. So if that gives us a bit of a brief history of where we're at, and I think here's where our current applications are. And again, I've written there, and I know I've said it a few times, but all these current applications we have is the reactive type of AI that we've talked about in the most basic sense of things. So if we just try and keep it down into this at the basics, we have sensors in all these products. We have algorithms that are not necessarily adapting, but have been programmed into it by a bunch of very clever engineers. And those algorithms have been tested on patients, they've been tweaked, they've been tested again, they've been tweaked, and then they've been okayed to go on actually a product that would sell. So sensors plus the algorithms equals an output, and then hopefully that's what gives us the functionality of a leg. So for instance, we said the Genium has been around since 2011, but I would say the physical form of the Genium has been around since 2011. The algorithms working in the background of it have been improved and have been tweaked over that period of time. So there has been an evolution of it. It's been obviously less tangible, but I think from the output and from the quality that the patient gets from it, it's a much better product than it was back in 2011. A lot of these types of products also have calibration stages in it as well. So they will monitor how the patient is walking and use that to set the initial parameters of the leg. So for instance, if somebody we'll ask the patient to walk at different speeds, and it will monitor how high the knee is bending. And then it will give parameters for the knee to react to those different speeds. That's only actually done in most of these products in a clinical setting. So it's not happening in real time. There's not artificial intelligence monitoring how people are walking, well, not in most of them, how people are walking and changing that all the time. Certainly in the products that we've got there, the Genium X3 and the Emperor, that doesn't happen. So if we move on to the next slide, this is where I kind of, I thought, do we try and go in a little bit in depth? And I'm going to try and probably skirt over these slightly, the slides, but it's like, what is this technology? How, I just keep saying there's sensors that go into it and there's an output, but what are these sensors? How does it work? And, and how does this make the knee joint, for this example I'm given, like the Genium, how does it give the level of safety, security and function to the patients that we see in clinic? So sensors that are here, the input sensors, we have a gyroscope, which is going to be able to tell the rotational movement of this knee. There is an accelerometer within this. An accelerometer can tell what direction the knee's moving at and what angle the knee's at. We have a moment sensor, which essentially within the knee joint, we can see what forces are being applied to the foot that's underneath the knee. So we can work out whether the weight is being taken on the toe of the foot or whether it's on the heel of the foot. And there's also an axial load sensor within this, and that axial load sensor can tell how much weight has been put on the leg. So is the patient putting all of their force down on the leg, or is a leg in the air and there's no force into it? So these are all the input sensors. So if we click to the next slide, this essentially is the very complicated model of the Genium. So you have your axial load sensor, you have an ankle moment sensor, you have a knee moment sensor, you have a knee angle sensor, you have the IMU, which is the gyroscope, and so these things can see all these different parameters of it, and then it starts to make calculations from them. So this is where the algorithms start to calculate. So we can calculate on the Genium exactly where the forces are going, where the weight is being taken. Is it on the heel of the foot? Is it on the middle of the foot? Is it on the toe of the foot? So it starts to build up this really, really, I would say, complicated model. But if you click to the next slide, you can dumb this right back down again, because at the end of the day, what you've got is input signals, a processor, which has the clever algorithms in, but what are the output signals of a prosthetic knee joint? And essentially all we've got in a prosthetic knee joint is there's a hydraulic cylinder at the back there that can control the resistance to that knee bending or that knee extending. And that resistance to that knee bending or extending is controlled by two little motors, one controlling the flexion resistance and one controlling the extension resistance. So we can set these at any parameters, or say we, the the computer system can set these at any parameters to give the knee joint some kind of functionality. So for instance, when the patient is standing still, the sensors work out the patient's not moving, and it closes both these valves so that the knee is locked. As the patient's walking, these valves will be constantly opening and closing. So if we just think about the flexion valve, that'll be for the knee bending. At heel strike, we don't want the knee to bend too much. We want the knee to be nice and secure. However, as we roll over the toe and we get to the point where the knee is going to go into a swing phase, we want the knee to bend, and we want that knee to bend at the minimum friction possible to make it as energy efficient for the patient to walk. So yeah, when you break it down into this slide, it's quite simplistic, really, what we do. I think moving on, with new technology coming out, there'll be more output signals from these knees. So as soon as we bring motors into knees, like we've already got in feet, and some knees are already out there, there's more output signals, and the model gets more complicated. Another application we've got for AI is within the Osser real knee. This knee is probably the one that I know of that does have like some adaptation to what the knee is functioning like as the patient is using it. So the real knee does monitor the patient's gait, it does monitor what they're doing, and it tries to actually change how the knee's functioning, how it's bending, and at what resistance and at what time of that. And I think when I learned about this, I thought, this is brilliant. This is properly, a bit of artificial intelligence going into a knee joint, predicting what's going to happen, and surely this is going to make a knee joint work even better. I think I've got a little question in there. Is this good in practice? And I think my clinical experience says I don't think it's always good in practice. I think it can be, but not for every patient. So the fact that this knee does change some of the output signals, I would say ends up making the knee slightly less predictable for a patient. Patients love consistency. They want to know their knee's going to do the exact same thing every single time. So as soon as you try to sort of change the parameters of that ever so slightly, it can make people slightly unsure of things. So when we do want to have things adapting, we need to make sure that they're doing it in a really safe and stable way. If we move on to the next slide, I think this is a really interesting one. So this is the sort of application of it in upper limb prosthetics. So if we look at it in pattern recognition, so not everyone will know what pattern recognition is. So I think if I sort of take a step back and explain, so myoelectric arms, traditionally, as we spoke about earlier on, are controlled by having two electrodes on. So if we take somebody who's below the elbow, they have two electrodes on the two muscle bellies, and what we do there is we take signals from those electrodes to one open the hand and the next one close the hand. We can then be quite clever about it and send the signal to both of those electrodes, and if we send both of those electrodes at the same time, it tells the hand to switch from open-close modes to being able to move the wrist. So we end up using the same two signals to control the hand and to control the wrist, but they can only be done at the one time. So I can only open and close the hand, and then I need to tell the arm to switch to wrist, and then I can change the wrist. So there's this like process that the user has to go through to swap between all these two different actions. But when we actually think about it, the robotics is really changing. So we are getting hands that have like lots and lots of different grips. So we have a control method that says open and close, but I have a hand that has 17 different grip functions. So the control of that is really difficult. And this is where the pattern recognition comes into it. And this is definitely where AI has been utilized in the development and actually in the training of it when it's on the patient. So instead of having two electrodes on this, we would then put essentially electrodes all over the inside of the socket, so essentially all over the patient's residual limb. And then we use sort of an AI-based app to look at what the patient can do. So we would get the patient sitting there and we would ask them, right, can you open the hand? And they would have to think about opening the hand. And then what that would do would send some signals to the muscles that were left in their stump. And then the computer system would record the pattern that all those electrodes picked up. It's just looking at a pattern. And then you would ask them, right, close the hand. And then again, the system would pick up a pattern for close hand. And hopefully those two patterns differ slightly. And that's the same idea, it's the same idea as what we talked about, the open and close of the hand with two electrodes. But then what we can do is ask them to rotate the wrist outwards. It picks up another pattern. Rotate the wrist inwards. It hopefully picks up another pattern. Maybe they then can say, right, let's look at different grips in the hand. So we can look at it and say, right, well, why don't we open the hand, but when we close it, we just want it to point the finger, just have a sort of finger point there. Or we might want to do it where when we close the hand, can we have the thumb in opposition? Or we could train it to have the thumb in a lateral grip where it sort of pinches onto the top of the hand. So hopefully what this kind of system, with doing all this learning and the training with the patient, and this is done via like normally a phone app, the system can start to learn these inputs of the patient and then make the prosthesis more intuitive to control. So if we move on to the next slide. So that's, this is an example of that system. So the photo that you've got on the right hand side there has the socket with all the electrodes in it. It goes into a chip that makes all the decisions, and then those cables go to the hand and make the hand do, or the hand and wrist do what it should do. So again, all programmed via a phone app, and it makes, as I said, the intuitive control. So we click on to the next slide. There's a video here.
With his left hand.
And this is not the best video, but it shows the guy opening and closing the hand and then pointing the finger and then rotating. And he's doing that really intuitively. Wish I had a better video, to be honest, but that's the only one I could find while doing the presentation. So this is technology that we use in prosthetics at the moment, and it's great because we have all the technology from the robotics, and it's the control systems that have been letting us down. And this is, I think, where AI is going to really make a big, massive leap forward to it. Richard talked about Elon Musk's Neuralink that they've fitted in the first sort of human being. I'd love it. I'm sure we'll get there, but that Neuralink will be what controls prosthetic arms in the future, or some kind of variation in that. And I think that's where we will get to the point where we can give patients really like good control of dexterity and everything. So moving on, just aware of time, AI is a rehabilitation tool. We use this. We use it. I think it can be used in the grand scheme of rehabilitation, and there's lots of new apps and lots of new things coming out on the internet. So you can essentially, it's a wee bit like the ChatGPT. You can talk about, as a clinician, you can enter in, your patient has a shoulder deficit, they've got shoulder pain, they've got weakness in X muscle, and they've got weakness in Y muscle, and there's a limited range of movement there. Then these AI tools can generate exercise programs for the patient, which I think, again, it's what Graham talked about. It's that time saving. So there's a time saving, sort of part for the clinicians involved. I think the interesting thing that I've seen recently, and I've not used it, but I've looked at it online, is almost rehab and exercise monitoring. So not a physio, but obviously work closely with physios. And we always talk about people come in for physio, but the real physio is done at home. We teach patients what exercises they should be doing, what they should be strengthening. They can only come in here for a certain amount of time, but they're wearing their prosthetic leg hopefully all the time at home, so that's when the real physio is happening. But then they come back in and we look at it and you're like, yeah, those movement patterns we trained you in, you've not quite done that in the right way, or those exercises to strengthen that hip, you're cheating and using other muscles and you're not quite doing that. So actually having sort of video monitoring of them doing their exercises and being able to monitor that and give them real-time sort of feedback would be great. And then there's almost like, you can look at it as goal setting as well. We use a lot of goal setting within rehab, and we quite often we have to have goal setting meetings at certain points in time during the rehab process, and then we reassess, and then we set some new goals. Whereas I think if you had AI involved in these these goal setting situations, and you had AI monitoring them doing their exercises and their rehab, then I think this goal setting could be really fluid, rather than at certain points during the rehab process, the goals could almost be changing as the patient is progressing. And I think it would make a quicker and smarter rehab process. So yeah, if we just go on to the next slide. So coming on to the last section of this is where we've got the future applications of artificial intelligence. And I think this is where, this is where I think it's going to be quite exciting. And I think it will, undoubtedly change our industry. It's not going to happen tomorrow. And as I said, I think prosthetics has always been a little bit behind other industries because borrowing technology. A good example of one is a current study that's been done by Southampton University. So one way that we make a prosthetic leg, we've talked a lot about the knee joints and the feet, but the most important part of any prosthetic leg is the socket. That's the part that the patient fits into. It's the part that's bespoke to them, and it's the part that gives them comfort in the prosthetic leg. If they're not comfortable in a prosthetic leg, then they're not going to be able to utilize it to its full potential. So what we do to make a prosthetic leg is we can scan the stump. So we'll take a 3D image of it using a light scanner, and this is technology we currently use, and then we would go on to the computer image and we would start to change the shape of that, because under load the soft tissues react in a different way. So we call this rectification. So we take the scan, we rectify it, and then we make a socket, and then we look at how that socket fits, and we decide, is that socket fitting well? Is it comfortable? Do we need to make some changes to it? So what Southampton University are doing is they're monitoring that process. They are they're getting a copy of the original scan of the stump. Once it is rectified, they are getting a copy of the image once it's rectified. They're then getting feedback on how comfortable that socket was, and if there was any other modifications that had to be made to the computer model to make sure that that stump is comfortable. So therefore, what they're able to do is they're able to take all that data, and this is back to what we talked about at the start, it's data, well annotated data in this case, because it's been annotated by the clinician that's made the socket, and they'll be able to see what modifications have been made and how comfortable those modifications have made the socket. So what that's actually going to lead to is the automated shaping of prosthetic sockets. So hopefully all we'll need to do in the future is to scan the stump. The AI algorithm will automatically rectify or modify the shape of that stump, and then that will give us the correct shape and volume to make the first prosthetic socket, which will speed up the process. It's back to the generative AI that we were talking about with Graham earlier on. A lot of what AI can do is speed these processes up. So you could argue there's less skill involved, but there's a lot of different other parts to prosthetic leg. I look at it as rather than less skill, is speeding up of the process. So if we move to the next slide, this is another university project. I've not put the links to it because I was kind of given some of the information slightly not in confidence, but it's not something that's been widely publicised at the moment. So this is looking at the pressures within a prosthetic socket. So one of the issues that we have as clinicians is I can make a prosthetic leg for somebody, and it can be really comfortable and they can be really happy with it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that in 6 months' time that they're going to have the same level of comfort, because the human body changes. What this project's looking at is looking at these load sensors, and so basically they're putting load sensors within the prosthetic socket, monitoring what the load is, and then trying to use that data to suggest modifications that could happen in a socket. So for instance, we've used what we learned in the previous slide. We've made them a really comfortable socket. The patient's walked away on it. They've come back into clinic 3 months later and they went, it's not quite as good as it was. We could then put this kind of pressure sensing technology in it, whether it's like what we see in the photos there, or I think reality is when it comes into a commercially viable option, it will be instrumented like a silicon liner that's instrumented. We'll put it on, we'll get them walking up and down, and then the AI algorithms will suggest what modifications we need to make to that shape. So if that shape's already been captured at the start, this now inputs into what modification should be happening to that shape. We could then, generate a new prosthetic socket for them. And when you think about, 3D print technology and how that's coming on, hopefully the case of a print of the button, come back later this afternoon, and we have your new prosthetic socket, which is a modification of what you've already had. If we fast forward technology even further, it could be a self-modifying socket. That doesn't exist anymore at the moment, but you never know of what happens. So we just go on to the next slide. And I think another really good application for this is for using AI is the rapid development of some of the control systems. So this is an idea that I got, as I said, I did a little bit of research. I asked around, old colleagues, a little bit of background of me. I've obviously worked as a clinician for the last 18 years, but that I've not always worked in a private clinic. I've worked in the NHS, but I've also worked in a couple of R&D departments as well. So working with engineers that are developing, some of the new technology that's coming, that's happening at the moment. The feedback I've got when I was doing my research here is these R&D departments are really focusing on data collection of patients. So they are getting as many patients walking in, current technology, not necessarily future technology, but current technology, and looking at data. They're looking at how much pressure is on the toe, when's the knee bending, at what time's happening. They're analysing their data in different scenarios, walking upstairs, downstairs, tripping over obstacles, being able to analyse all that data. Because currently, when you do have a new prosthetic component that's in development, all the feedback comes from putting it on a patient. So if you look at the photo there, you've got a fairly big, ugly, sort of very crude looking powered device that's on somebody, and you're going to have to get them to walk. And if you, as an engineer, if they have created an algorithm that says the knee should do X, Y, and Z, and that algorithm's wrong, then the patient could trigger it in the wrong way, and that could cause a fall. So having been in that situation in an R&D department, these kind of things happen. You get the algorithms wrong, and you make the situation worse for the patient. So the development of these algorithms is a really laborious, long process at the moment. The idea that they're going for now is if they can collect all this data, all of the different algorithms can be automatically generated by AI, but also computer simulated. So they can simulate what would happen if this patient caught their toe on a curb that was 18 millimeters high. You could automatically predict how that knee would react. And if it didn't react in the way that you wanted to, then it could be looking at tweaking that artificial intelligence. This is actually really similar to how autonomous cars work. So when we talk about autonomous cars and what the decisions that they are going to do, is much, this is a conversation I had with a friend of mine who works in AI. He was explaining that as much as you've got like AI making decisions, it's not got that real time sort of like computer processing capacity to make that decision in exact real time. What it's actually doing is it's already simulated these decisions in the past, and it knows what it should do. So in your automated car, it's already simulated the fact that somebody's going to run out on the road at this particular time. It's lived that situation already in a simulation before. It gets really complicated, but it's already thought about that, so it knows how it's going to react. So again, that same situation is going to be put into what these knees are going to do. And I think, again, it's back to that whole time-saving feature. As soon as we have new technology of how a knee should bend, then the computer algorithms will be sped up so much quicker. If we go into the next slide, I don't want to cover too much of what's already been said, but I'm a clinician. I'm also write expert witness reports. So you've got the sort of ethical question of, are people using ChatGPT to augment the reports? I currently use stuff like Grammarly, which is an excellent plugin and app that you can use for Microsoft, which is a really good AI generated, an AI spelling and grammar checker. You can use it for proofreading. I'm a much better clinician than I am writer. So I definitely like to use these tools to improve my writing capabilities rather than necessarily the knowledge that's in there. I can't say I've used ChatGPT in a report yet, but I can imagine being able to summarise like what I learned there from Graham was maybe getting a lot of the information that's there and being able to summarise it in some kind of way. It's just something to really think of, and it'd be interesting to know from the lawyers that are obviously here, like what their thoughts are on these types of things. And then, yeah, just moving on to the next slide. So just a couple of references and acknowledgements. As I said at the start, I am not an expert in AI. I've done a good bit of research on this. There was a very interesting paper that I found online, which is the top one there. I spoke to old colleagues in Blatchford, in Otterbock, Southampton University, and in particular, actually, an old colleague of mine, Dr. David Mosser, who I used to work with at Blatchford's, developing some of the knees and feet. He's now moved on to a robotics company that specialises in AI. So yeah, definitely helped me out a lot while preparing for this. So yeah, just thought I'd say thanks. But yeah, just move on to the next slide, and that is me finished. And thank you very much for having me. And if anyone's got any questions, then yeah, feel free to put them in the chat, and Richard can ask away. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Alan. Really interesting. We haven't had any questions in. I hope that means that our speakers have covered everything and not that you've been stunned into silence by the capabilities of AI. If you do have any questions in the next couple of minutes, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section. Now, thank you for attending today. This was the first of our 4-part webinar series exploring the link between artificial intelligence and the law. The second webinar of the series will take place on the 17th of April, and that will look at the link between artificial intelligence and brain injury. And we'll be joined at that webinar by Dr. Edmund Bonikowski, a consultant in neurological rehabilitation. And Dr. Bonikowski is going to explore how he believes that AI can transform brain injury rehabilitation. The third webinar in our series will take place on the 12th of June at 12 noon, and that will look at the link between AI and spinal cord injury. And to conclude our series, we'll be looking at AI and pediatrics, and that will be on the 25th of September at 12 o'clock. So sign-up details for all of those webinars will appear in the Q&A or on LinkedIn or on our website. So please join us if those are of interest. It remains for me to thank you, all of our speakers. So thank you to Graham, to Katie, and to Alan. Thank you too for joining us today. Hope you found it insightful. Please do leave us some feedback on the link in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, and enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you very much.